In the packed Hong Kong Exhibition Center, a revered martial artist was about to declare the invincibility of his system. What began as a celebration of Ip Man's legacy turned into a seismic confrontation when an American icon strode onto the floor, his presence demanding recognition. Donnie Yen wasn't your typical movie star. For over 40 years, he had embodied Wing Chun through relentless training and global performances, known for carrying Ip Man's philosophy beyond the screen into living practice. When Chuck Norris stepped unannounced onto the polished wooden floor, the crowd realized they weren't witnessing entertainment, but confrontation. The American master's quiet advance wasn't just an entrance, it was the ignition of a clash between traditions. Donnie's calm declaration had unknowingly summoned an equal, and his strategic response would trigger a dialogue of movement destined to shake martial history. What began as a demonstration became a dialogue of power and principle. The martial world and everyone watching would never forget the night when Ip Man's heir and America's warrior faced each other, and philosophy itself was put to the test. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The exhibition center in Hong Kong pulsed with anticipation. Every seat filled. Every aisle crowded with standing spectators. Phones raised high to capture what many considered the martial arts event of the year. Floodlights bathed the central demonstration area in brilliant white, making the polished wooden floor gleam like amber glass. Banners celebrating centuries of martial arts tradition hung from the rafters, swaying gently in the climate-controlled air. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, each word carefully chosen to build the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, the exhibition center welcomes a man who needs no introduction. A master who has brought the legacy of Ip Man to the world. The living embodiment of Wing Chun excellence, Donnie Yen. The crowd erupted as Donnie stepped onto the stage. He wore simple black pants and a fitted white shirt, unadorned except for a small Wing Chun emblem over his heart. His demeanor was calm, centered, a stark contrast to the electric energy surrounding him. He bowed deeply to the audience, then to his students who had taken positions around the periphery of the demonstration floor. Among the audience sat veteran martial artist Master Wong, now in his 70s. He leaned forward in his seat, eyes sharp beneath white brows. He had trained in multiple disciplines throughout his life, and now viewed the martial arts world with the detached wisdom of someone who had seen styles rise and fall with the decades. He carries himself like water, Master Wong murmured to the younger practitioner beside him. Watch how he holds the space, not with tension, but with presence. Donnie moved to center stage, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he began to demonstrate, not with flashy movements designed to impress, but with the precise, economic motions that defined Wing Chun. His hands flowed through the air, trapping, striking, deflecting each movement containing potential energy rather than wasted force. Wing Chun, he explained, voice carrying clearly through the microphone pinned to his collar, is not about dominating through strength. It is about understanding energy, redirecting it, harmonizing with it. He demonstrated with a student who attacked with increasing speed. Donnie barely seemed to move, yet his attacker found himself controlled, redirected, neutralized. The hands do not push away, Donnie continued, demonstrating the principle. They feel the energy and borrow it. The stance does not resist. It roots itself to the earth. For 30 minutes, he showcased the art, explaining philosophies passed down through generations. The audience was rapt, many recording every detail. The demonstrations progressed from basic forms to applications against multiple opponents, each exchange highlighting the efficiency and precision of Wing Chun. Near the conclusion of his demonstration, Donnie paused, looking out over the crowd. The room fell silent, sensing a shift in energy. Many styles claim superiority through force, through spectacle, he said. his voice quiet, yet carrying to every corner of the hall. But Wing Chun Ip Man's Wing Chun teaches us that true mastery lies in efficiency, in understanding rather than overwhelming. He demonstrated a simple deflection that sent his much larger opponent stumbling off balance with minimal contact. This is the heart of what Ip Man taught, what I have dedicated my life to preserving. When practiced with true understanding. He paused, his expression reflecting not arrogance but quiet conviction. Ip Man's style beats anything. The statement hung in the air. It wasn't delivered as a boast or challenge, more as a philosophical truth he had discovered through decades of discipline. Yet the implications rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in admiration, others exchanged skeptical glances. The announcer returned to the microphone, his voice rising with practiced enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, what a privilege to witness such mastery. Donnie Yen, embodying the legacy of the great Ip Man. Applause thundered through the exhibition hall. Camera flashes intensified. Donnie bowed deeply to his students, then to the audience, his expression humble despite the adoration. As the applause continued, a subtle shift occurred near the entrance. Security personnel whispered into headsets. The announcer glanced toward the commotion, his professional smile faltering for a moment. Master Wong noticed it too. He straightened in his seat, eyes narrowing. "Something's happening," he said to his companion. Along the back wall, phones began turning away from Donnie, pointing instead toward the main entrance. Whispers spread through the crowd like ripples in water. Donnie, still center stage, sensed the change. He turned slightly, following the crowd's shifting attention. His expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could see the subtle tightening around his eyes, recognition, not fear. The announcer cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for the next segment," he never finished the sentence. The crowd near the entrance parted like a wave, creating a path toward the demonstration floor. Through this opening walked a man whose presence commanded attention without effort. Broad-shouldered, dressed in simple black, with a bearing that spoke of decades in martial arts, Chuck Norris approached the stage. He wasn't flanked by security or entourage. He didn't need them. At 70-plus years, his movements still carried the fluid power that had made him a legend. His face, framed by his trademark beard, now more salt than pepper, was impassive. But his eyes never left Donnie. The whispers became murmurs, then excited chatter. Phones swiveled between the two men, capturing what many sensed was a historic moment in the making. The announcer, visibly flustered, leaned toward his assistant. "Is he scheduled? Was this planned?" No one answered. No one needed to. This wasn't planned. It was destiny. Chuck reached the edge of the demonstration floor and stopped. For a long moment, he and Donnie simply looked at each other across the space, two legends from different worlds, different traditions, whose paths had somehow never crossed until this moment. Then Chuck did something unexpected. He smiled, not the challenging smirk of a rival, but the genuine acknowledgement of one master to another. And he bowed, a gesture of respect that preceded his words. The exhibition hall held its breath. Master Wong leaned forward, whispering, "Now we will see what happens when philosophy meets legacy." Donnie Yen remained perfectly still at the center of the floor, his stance relaxed, yet ready, watching as Chuck Norris approached, marking the moment when demonstration would transform into something far more profound. The silence in the exhibition hall was thick enough to touch a collective held breath as Chuck Norris straightened from his bow. Camera flashes punctuated the stillness like distant lightning, each illuminating the contours of tension etched across the room. Security personnel hovered uncertainly at the edges, unsure whether to intervene in this unscripted moment. Chuck took another step forward, now fully on the demonstration floor. The overhead lights caught the glint of determination in his eyes. "Donnie Yen," he said, his voice carrying without effort. "I've watched your films, studied your interpretations of Wing Chun." He paused, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "That was quite a statement you just made." The crowd's energy shifted, some leaning forward eagerly, others exchanging nervous glances. This wasn't the bombastic challenge many might have expected, but something more measured, more authentic. Donnie remained centered, his posture neither defensive nor aggressive. "Sifu Norris," he responded, using the respectful title for a teacher. "Your presence honors this exhibition." A pause. "But I stand by my words." Chuck nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Ip Man style beats anything?" He glanced around at the audience, then back to Donnie. "That's a bold claim from a thoughtful man." The announcer, sensing his role in this unexpected drama, stepped tentatively toward his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have an unscheduled—" "What I'm wondering," Chuck continued, speaking over the announcer as if he hadn't heard him, "is whether you're talking about the style or the man who embodies it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The question cut to the heart of martial arts philosophy. Was it the system that prevailed, or the individual who had mastered it? Donnie's expression remained composed, but those in the front rows could see the subtle shift in his stance, weight distributing evenly, roots deepening imperceptibly into the floor. "The two cannot be separated," he answered. "The style lives through the practitioner. The practitioner is shaped by the style." Chuck nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we should test that philosophy." He removed his black jacket, handing it to a nearby assistant without looking away from Donnie. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt that did nothing to hide the fact that his 70-plus years had done little to diminish his physical conditioning. The crowd erupted into competing chants. "Donnie! Donnie! Chuck! Chuck!" The energy in the room transformed from anticipation to electric excitement. Phones were raised higher, social media live streams beginning in dozens of languages simultaneously. The announcer, realizing the historical significance unfolding before him, found his professional voice again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, struggling to be heard above the crowd, "we are witnessing something unprecedented. Two legends, two philosophies of martial arts excellence, coming together in an unexpected challenge." Master Wong shook his head slightly. "This is not a circus," he muttered. "This is something much older. A testing of truths." On the demonstration floor, Donnie's students exchanged uncertain glances, looking to their master for guidance. With a subtle nod, Donnie indicated they should clear the space. They bowed deeply and moved to the periphery, creating an open arena for what was to come. "I did not come here to challenge you, Donnie Yen," Chuck said. His voice, quieter now, meant more for Donnie than the crowd. "I came to learn from you. But when I heard your claim," he rolled his shoulders slightly. "Let's just say some claims need to be explored, not just stated." Donnie inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Through exploration, we find truth," he responded. Then, addressing the crowd without taking his eyes off Chuck, "This is not a fight, this is a dialogue, physical philosophy." The distinction was important, and the more experienced martial artists in the audience nodded in understanding. This wasn't about victory or defeat, it was about testing principles, about the conversation of combat that revealed deeper truths. Chuck moved to one side of the floor, while Donnie positioned himself opposite. The space between them seemed charged with potential energy. Neither adopted an obvious fighting stance, both stood relaxed, hands loose at their sides, yet anyone with training could see they were perfectly ready. The announcer, sensing the gravity of the moment, lowered his voice to a tone of reverent anticipation. Two systems of martial thought, developed across oceans from each other, embodied by two masters who have devoted their lives to perfection, about to engage in dialogue. In the front row, a journalist whispered to her cameraman, "This is insane. Chuck Norris is what, in his 80s? And he's challenging Donnie Yen?" Master Wong overheard and leaned forward. "Age means less than you think when experience runs that deep," he said. "Watch and learn." On the floor, Chuck and Donnie began to circle slowly, each studying the other with the practiced eye of a lifetime spent in martial arts. The crowd fell to a hushed murmur, aware they were witnessing something rare, not the choreographed spectacle of cinema or the regulated combat of competition, but an authentic exchange between masters. "Wing Chun," Donnie said as they circled, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "teaches us that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line." Chuck nodded. "And my experience teaches that sometimes the straight line is exactly what your opponent expects." Without warning, he moved not with the explosive speed of youth, but with the economical precision of experience. A testing jab, not committed enough to leave him vulnerable, but quick enough to require response. Donnie's hand came up in a classic Wing Chun deflection. Pak Sao, simultaneously redirecting and preparing to counter. The movements were so fast and subtle that many in the audience missed the exchange entirely, just two men who seemed to shift slightly, then resume their circular dance. But those who understood martial arts recognized the opening moves of something profound. This wasn't about landing blows. It was about testing reactions, reading energy, establishing the conversation. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. Norris just tested Yen's centerline theory. And Yen answered without even thinking. Chuck nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. "Efficient," he acknowledged. But efficiency isn't everything. This time when he moved, it was a more complex pattern, a feint to draw a response, followed by a quick change of angle. Again, Donnie's response came from decades of Wing Chun training, hands flowing like water to intercept, control, redirect, no wasted motion, no excess force. Each movement contained potential energy rather than expending it needlessly. The exchange continued, gradually increasing in tempo and complexity. Neither man threw full-power strikes. This wasn't about damage but discovery. Yet even in this controlled exploration, the skill on display was breathtaking. Chuck's more direct style, influenced by his background in Tang Soo Do and other Korean arts, created angles and power that tested the Wing Chun responses. Donnie's sensitivity and economy of motion challenged Chuck's more expansive approach. The crowd watched in rapt silence now, the earlier chants fading to murmurs of appreciation as the martial dialogue deepened. This wasn't the flashy spectacle many had expected. It was something more authentic, more meaningful. In the front row, Master Wong nodded slowly. "Now, they begin to speak to each other in the oldest language," he said quietly. "The language of movement, of energy, of intention." On the demonstration floor, the circle tightened as both men grew more comfortable with each other's responses. The testing exchanges became longer sequences, still controlled, still thoughtful, but with increasing complexity and commitment. And in those exchanges, something unexpected began to emerge. Not competition, but communication. Not a battle for supremacy, but a shared exploration. Each man's face showed intense concentration, yet also a growing appreciation for the other's mastery. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. After one particularly intricate exchange that ended in perfect balance, with neither gaining advantage. Chuck stepped back slightly. A smile, genuine, appreciative, crossed his face. "I begin to see why you value this system," he said, nodding to Donnie. Donnie returned the gesture. "And I see why your reputation transcends any single style." The crowd, sensing a shift in energy, erupted into spontaneous applause, not for a victor, but for the mutual respect unfolding before them. The announcer, caught up in the moment, spoke into his microphone with genuine awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing not just an exchange of techniques, but a conversation between philosophies, between lifetimes of dedication." But both Chuck and Donnie seemed oblivious to the crowd now, focused entirely on the dialogue of movement. As they circled again, the stakes seemed to rise. This initial testing was complete. Now would come something deeper. Chuck's next movement contained more commitment, more intention, not aggression, but a clear statement of principle through physical expression. The challenge had truly begun. The exhibition hall's atmosphere transformed as the pace between the two masters intensified. The initial testing was complete. Now came the true exchange of ideas through motion. The crowd's collective breathing seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the engagement unfolding before them. Chuck moved first with a sequence that displayed the foundation of his eclectic style. A quick jab that flowed into a roundhouse kick, not aimed to strike, but to establish distance and angle. The movements carried the hallmark efficiency of his decades of training, power contained rather than flaunted. Donnie responded with pure Wing Chun principles, centerline theory in action. His hands came up not to block, but to occupy the space between himself and Chuck, intercepting the jab with a movement that simultaneously protected and threatened. As the kick came, he shifted slightly, allowing it to pass while his hands maintained their position of control. "Notice how he doesn't retreat," Master Wong commented to those around him. "Wing Chun doesn't give ground unnecessarily. It controls the center." The exchange continued, gaining momentum. Chuck pressed forward with a combination of Western and Eastern techniques, hooks that transformed into spinning back fists, low kicks that tested Donnie's root. His movements expressed decades of cross-training, of synthesizing what worked from multiple disciplines into a cohesive whole. Donnie remained true to Wing Chun's core: economical, direct, sensitive to energy. His hands rarely moved more than a few inches from his center line, yet they consistently intercepted Chuck's attacks through positioning rather than force. When he countered, it was with short, precise strikes that carried power despite their limited range. "Chain punching," someone in the crowd whispered as Donnie demonstrated the rapid-fire straight punches characteristic of Wing Chun. Chuck absorbed the technique, not with resistance but with adaptation, slipping just enough to reduce impact while maintaining his own structure. This wasn't about avoiding hits entirely, it was about receiving information, processing it, responding to it. The physical dialogue deepened. A strike was no longer just a strike. It was a question posed. A defense was not merely protection. It was an answer offered. Their bodies communicated in a language older than words, exchanging perspectives shaped by their different journeys through martial arts. "You feel the difference now," Chuck said between exchanges, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. "Your Wing Chun wants the inside position. My approach prefers to work from the outside." Donnie nodded, hands still in position. Wing Chun teaches that controlling the center controls everything else. And, if you can't reach the center, Chuck demonstrated immediately, using his slightly longer range to establish a perimeter that kept Donnie's hands just short of their preferred position. Instead of forcing his way through, Donnie adapted a subtle shift in stance, a change in angle that suddenly placed him inside Chuck's guard. "The center is not just physical space," he responded. "It is wherever balance exists." The crowd murmured in appreciation as the philosophical discussion manifested through physical demonstration. This was martial arts in its purest form. Not just techniques, but principles. Not just movements, but ideas. As they continued, the contrast in their approaches became more evident. Chuck's style incorporated the angular footwork and powerful kicks of his Korean training, combined with the direct hand techniques of his American boxing influence. Donnie's Wing Chun remained tight, efficient, relying on sensitivity and positioning rather than expansive movement. Yet something remarkable was happening. With each exchange, each man began subtly incorporating elements of the other's approach. Chuck's movements became more economical when in close range. Donnie's footwork adapted to handle the longer-range attacks. It wasn't imitation. It was evolution through interaction. They're learning from each other, Master Wong said softly. This is the true purpose of martial exchange. The announcer, who had fallen silent in appreciation of what was unfolding, found his voice again. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing something extraordinary. Two distinct approaches to martial arts, each with its own philosophy, finding common ground through physical dialogue. On the demonstration floor, the exchange reached a natural pause. Both men stood, slightly breathless but composed, a few feet apart. The respect in their eyes was unmistakable, not just professional courtesy, but genuine appreciation for what each represented. Your control of space is remarkable, Chuck acknowledged. Wing Chun makes every inch count. Your adaptation is equally impressive, Donnie replied. You've integrated many perspectives into a cohesive whole. The crowd applauded spontaneously, sensing the authenticity of the moment. This wasn't rehearsed praise, it was earned recognition. But within that moment of mutual respect, something else flickered across Chuck's expression, a question not yet answered. He nodded slightly, as if making a decision, then reset his stance. Let's take this dialogue a step further, he suggested, his voice carrying a new intensity. Let's see how your Wing Chun handles pressure. The crowd's energy shifted instantly. The exploratory phase was complete. Now would come a true test of principles under stress, of philosophy under fire. Donnie's expression remained calm, but those who knew him could see the subtle change in his focus, deeper, more centered. Pressure, he responded, is what reveals truth. Without further preamble, Chuck launched forward with renewed purpose. His strikes came faster now, his combinations more complex. Not reckless aggression, but calculated intensity testing. Not just techniques, but resolve. Not just skill, but spirit. Donnie's Wing Chun adapted instantly. His stance lowered slightly, his structure becoming more rooted. His hands moved with increased urgency, not frantic but focused, maintaining the centerline principle, even under the increased tempo. The exchange escalated from dialogue to debate, still respectful, still controlled, but with statements made more emphatically, with principles defended more vigorously. Chuck pressed the advantage of his slightly longer reach, forcing Donnie to solve the problem of distance. Donnie responded with the core Wing Chun concept of sticking hands, maintaining contact to neutralize the reach disadvantage. The crowd's reaction transformed from appreciative murmurs to vocal support, different sections cheering for different moments of brilliance from each master. Phones captured every second. Social media exploding with live commentary as the exhibition became something no one had anticipated. In one particularly intense sequence, Chuck unleashed a combination that seemed to overwhelm Wing Chun's defenses. A flurry of strikes from changing angles that tested the limits of Donnie's sensitivity. For a moment, it appeared the centerline had been compromised. But Donnie's response revealed the depth of his mastery. Rather than abandoning principle under pressure, he expressed it more purely, his structure, bending without breaking, his hands finding the gaps between Chuck's attacks, not through speed, but through understanding of energy. When the sequence concluded, both men had scored theoretical touches, points that in a competitive match would have registered, but here served as exclamation points in their physical conversation. They separated again, breathing harder now, but neither showing signs of fatigue that impacted their structure. The mutual respect had only deepened, tempered now by the heat of honest exchange. "Your Wing Chun adapts," Chuck observed. "As does your approach," Donnie acknowledged. The simple statements carried layers of meaning understood by those with martial arts experience. Both were recognizing that true mastery wasn't rigid adherence to form, but the ability to maintain principle while adapting to circumstance. Master Wong nodded in satisfaction. "Now they begin to understand each other beyond technique," he said. "Now, the real exchange begins." On the demonstration floor, both men reset once more. The exploration had become a conversation. The conversation had become a debate. Now, it would become a true testing of philosophies, not to determine which was superior, but to reveal what each could learn from the other. Chuck's eyes narrowed slightly, focus intensifying. "Let's see what happens," he said, "when your Wing Chun faces everything I've learned." Donnie's response was simple, embodying the directness of his art. "Let's see." The crowd fell silent again as both men moved toward each other. The next phase of their exchange promising to push beyond demonstration into revelation. The atmosphere in the exhibition hall crackled with anticipation as both masters reset. What had begun as an impromptu demonstration had evolved into something profound, a rare, authentic testing of martial philosophies that transcended ego or competition. The audience, regardless of their background, sensed they were witnessing something historic. Overhead, the bright exhibition lights cast dramatic shadows across the polished wooden floor. The air conditioning hummed steadily, barely audible beneath the murmurs of the crowd. Every movement, every subtle shift in stance between the two masters seemed magnified by the collective focus directed toward them. Chuck's approach shifted subtly. His stance widened slightly, incorporating elements that hinted at his diverse training background, the solid foundation of Tang Soo Do, the adaptability of his American innovations. His hands came up in a guard that wasn't purely Eastern or Western, but a synthesis developed through decades of exploration. "Now we'll see his true expression," Master Wong commented, leaning forward intently. "Not just techniques learned, but principles embodied." A young Wing Chun practitioner nearby whispered to his friend, "Look at his base, it's broader than traditional karate but more mobile than boxing." Across the floor, Donnie remained rooted in Wing Chun's structure. But there was a new alertness in his posture. His hands floated at center line, relaxed yet ready, embodying the paradox at the heart of Ip Man's teaching: simultaneous relaxation and readiness, softness containing hardness. His breathing remained measured and deep, his expression calm despite the intensity of the moment. "Notice how Donnie maintains his structure," Master Wong observed to those around him. "Even under pressure, Wing Chun doesn't abandon its principles, it expresses them more purely." The announcer, sensing the shift in energy, lowered his voice to match the gravity of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are about to witness the full expression of both men's art, not just what they do but who they are as martial artists." Chuck moved first, launching a combination that showcased the integrated nature of his approach. A jab transformed mid-extension into a hook, followed by a low roundhouse kick that flowed seamlessly into a spinning technique. The sequence was both beautiful and functional, expressing principles of momentum and continuous attack that had become his trademark. The crowd gasped collectively. Even those with limited martial arts knowledge could appreciate the fluidity and precision of his movement. Several phones lifted higher, desperate to capture what many recognized as a rare glimpse of Chuck's actual fighting method, rather than his cinematic persona. Donnie's response demonstrated why Wing Chun had survived centuries of martial evolution. Rather than retreating from the onslaught, he stepped into it, occupying the center line even as Chuck's attacks sought to claim it. His hands moved with extraordinary economy, each motion simultaneously defensive and offensive. Where Chuck's approach created power through rotation and momentum, Wing Chun generated force through structure and directness. Incredible, someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. He's controlling space rather than escaping it. The contrast was striking, yet neither seemed inherently superior, just different expressions of martial truth adapted to different contexts. "Look how Chuck uses the entire space," someone commented from the crowd, "and how Donnie controls the space between them." A martial arts instructor in the second row explained quietly to his students, "Chuck creates angles to generate power using the opponent's space. Donnie maintains position to redirect energy, controlling the opponent's intention." Two different solutions to the same problem. The exchange intensified. Chuck pressed harder, his combinations becoming more complex, leveraging his slight advantages in height and reach. His kicks targeted Donnie's structure, attempting to disrupt the root that gave Wing Chun its stability. His hand techniques came from unexpected angles, testing the centerline theory against omnidirectional attack. One particularly creative sequence saw Chuck feint a high kick, drop suddenly into a sweeping leg attack, then rise with an angular punch combination. A three-dimensional approach that challenged Wing Chun's traditionally linear framework. The movement carried the unmistakable influence of his Korean training, yet had evolved beyond traditional boundaries into something uniquely his own. Donnie's Wing Chun met the challenge not by matching force with force, but by expressing its core principles more purely. His stance became more rooted, his structure more integrated. His hands moved with increasing sensitivity, not just intercepting attacks, but controlling the space they moved through. When he countered, it was with short, direct strikes that carried power not from muscular effort, but from proper alignment. In one breathtaking moment, Chuck launched a spinning back kick, aimed at Donnie's midsection, a technique that had become iconic through his films, but was executed now with authentic intent rather than cinematic flair. The kick carried genuine power, the kind that comes from decades of refinement. Donnie didn't block or evade the kick in the conventional sense. Instead, his hands intercepted Chuck's leg just before full extension, not stopping its momentum but redirecting it slightly off target. Simultaneously, his stance adjusted to maintain structure while creating an angle that allowed him to launch three rapid strikes toward Chuck's temporarily exposed center. Chuck, displaying remarkable recovery, transitioned the redirected kick into a pivot that carried him just beyond the range of Donnie's counter. The entire exchange happened in less than 2 seconds, yet contained multiple layers of attack, defense, and tactical adjustment. For those in the audience with training, the technical brilliance on display was breathtaking. For those without martial background, the contrasting aesthetics told a story anyone could appreciate: angular versus direct, expansive versus economical, external expression versus internal structure. "Keep your eyes on their feet," Master Wong instructed those nearby. "Their hands may capture attention, but their foundations tell the true story." Indeed, the footwork revealed fundamental differences in philosophy. Chuck's stance remained mobile, adaptive, constantly shifting to create new angles of attack and defense. Donnie's maintained a more consistent structure, rooted but not rigid, prioritizing stability from which all techniques could be expressed efficiently. "Chuck's footwork creates opportunities," Master Wong explained. "Donnie's footwork maintains position. One seeks to change the battlefield, the other seeks to control it." A journalist, sitting near Master Wong, asked quietly, "Which approach is more effective?" The old master smiled. "That's the wrong question. Each solves different problems. The test isn't which system is better, but whether the practitioner truly understands the principles behind their system. The exhibition hall had fallen into a reverent hush, punctuated only by the sounds of movement on the demonstration floor and occasional murmurs of appreciation. Even those who had come expecting entertainment found themselves drawn into something deeper, not just watching a performance but witnessing an authentic dialogue between martial philosophies. After a particularly intense exchange that left both men slightly breathless, Chuck nodded in appreciation. "Your Wing Chun doesn't waste motion," he acknowledged. "Everything serves multiple purposes. And your approach doesn't limit itself to convention," Donnie replied. "It evolves constantly." The mutual respect was evident, yet both men's eyes retained the intensity of purpose. This wasn't just exhibition anymore, it was exploration at the deepest level. Testing not just physical technique, but the philosophies that gave those techniques meaning. The next sequence revealed more layers of contrast. Chuck initiated with a combination that showcased his integrated approach, a jab cross that flowed into an elbow strike, transitioning seamlessly to a clinch position that threatened knee strikes. The sequence demonstrated his comfort across all ranges of combat, from striking distance to close quarters. Donnie's response highlighted Wing Chun's specialization, its extraordinary efficiency in the range where most conflicts are decided. Rather than matching Chuck's range transitions, he controlled the space between them, using subtle adjustments in position and structure to maintain the distance where Wing Chun operated most effectively. When Chuck attempted to close to clinch range, Donnie's hands found his arms with remarkable sensitivity, simultaneously controlling his position while striking at available targets. When Chuck created distance for his longer-range techniques, Donnie stepped forward to reclaim the center line, not pursuing aggressively but methodically re-establishing his preferred fighting distance. "It's like watching two different languages describe the same reality," an older martial artist commented. "Neither wrong. Just different vocabularies for the same truth." Chuck reset, then launched his most complex combination, yet a sequence that blended high and low attacks, linear and circular movements, each technique flowing into the next without telegraph or hesitation. It was martial arts as mature expression, not just trained response. The culmination of a lifetime spent refining his approach. The combination began with a low feint that drew attention downward, followed by a high roundhouse kick that threatened Donnie's temple. As Donnie's hands moved to intercept the kick, Chuck transitioned immediately into a spinning back fist that approached from the opposite direction. When Donnie adjusted to this new threat, Chuck dropped levels suddenly, attacking the stability of Donnie's root with a sweeping movement. The sequence contained elements from at least 3 distinct martial traditions, yet flowed together as a unified whole, not a collection of techniques, but an integrated approach to solving the problem of combat. It wasn't just physically impressive, it was intellectually sophisticated, demonstrating Chuck's deep understanding of human movement and reaction. Donnie met the challenge with Wing Chun in its purest form. His sensitivity allowed him to track multiple threats simultaneously. His structure enabled him to absorb what couldn't be redirected, and his positioning let him find counters even within Chuck's continuous assault. Where another might have been overwhelmed by the diversity of attacks, Wing Chun's focused principles provided a framework for handling complexity through simplicity. His hands moved in tight, economic circles, not blocking each attack individually, but controlling the space through which attacks must travel. His stance adjusted constantly but subtly, maintaining structural integrity while finding the optimal position relative to Chuck's movement. When he countered, it was with direct strikes that exploited momentary openings created by Chuck's transitions between techniques. "Remarkable," Master Wong murmured. "Chuck attacks through diversity. Donnie defends through unity. 2 masters, 2 approaches, both valid." The crowd's reaction shifted from excited cheers to something approaching reverence. They weren't just watching techniques anymore, they were witnessing philosophies incarnate, perspectives on martial truth expressed through human movement. A veteran martial arts instructor leaned toward his colleague. Chuck's approach reflects the modern world. Adaptive, integrative, constantly evolving. Donnie's embodies traditional wisdom, focused, refined, deeply understood. We need both perspectives. In one breathtaking sequence, Chuck managed to disrupt Donnie's preferred range, forcing him to adapt Wing Chun principles to a distance where they were traditionally less comfortable. He accomplished this not through raw aggression but through tactical sophistication, using feints and misdirection to create openings, then exploiting those openings with unexpected entries. For a moment, it seemed the Ip Man style might have found its limitation. Donnie's hands, normally so effective at controlling the center line, struggled to intercept attacks coming from extended range and unusual angles. Several in the audience leaned forward, wondering if Chuck had found a gap in Wing Chun's defensive framework. But Donnie's response revealed the depth of his understanding. Rather than abandoning principle when challenged, he expressed it more essentially finding the Wing Chun truth beneath the Wing Chun form. His footwork adjusted, bringing him into range where his hands could function effectively. His upper body alignment shifted slightly, extending his effective reach without compromising structure. His timing became more precise, intercepting attacks earlier in their development. It wasn't perfect. Chuck landed a controlled strike that in a real confrontation would have scored significantly, but it demonstrated something more valuable than flawless technique: the ability to adapt principle to circumstance without abandoning it entirely. "There," Master Wong said quietly. "That's the sign of true mastery. Not performing techniques perfectly under ideal conditions, but maintaining principles under challenging ones." Chuck acknowledged the adaptation with a nod, then stepped back slightly, creating space. Both men were breathing harder now, not from fatigue but from the intensity of their exchange. Sweat glistened on their foreheads, but their eyes remained clear, focused. "Your Wing Chun adapts well outside its preferred range," Chuck observed. "As does your approach when drawn into closer quarters," Donnie responded. The simple exchange carried deeper meaning for those who understood. Both were acknowledging that true mastery wasn't about perfection within comfortable parameters, but functionality across all contexts. A young practitioner nearby whispered to his friend, "Did you hear that? They're not talking about who's winning, they're discussing what they're learning." The announcer, who had fallen silent during the intense exchange, found his voice again. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing transcends demonstration. This is martial philosophy made visible, the abstract made concrete through the mastery of these two legends." On the demonstration floor, both men reset once more. The testing had revealed strengths and limitations on both sides. Wing Chun's economy and directness provided extraordinary efficiency within its range, but required adaptation beyond it. Chuck's integrated approach offered versatility across distances, but sometimes sacrificed the perfect efficiency of more specialized systems. Neither was inherently superior, just different paths toward martial truth. Different answers to the eternal questions of combat and self-defense. An MMA fighter in the front row commented to his training partner, "It's like watching specialized tools versus a multi-tool. Both have their place, it depends on the job." His partner nodded. "And on who's using the tool. In the hands of masters like these, either approach works because they understand the principles behind the techniques." As Chuck and Donnie prepared for another exchange, their mutual respect was evident, not just in their words, but in their movement, the careful distance they maintained, the controlled power of their techniques, the acknowledgement in their eyes when something effective was demonstrated. This wasn't about defeating each other. It was about learning from each other. Chuck's expression grew more intense, not with aggression but with focus. "One more exchange," he suggested. "Everything we've got." Donnie nodded, his calm expression belying the intensity in his eyes. "Not to prove superiority," he clarified. "To find truth," Chuck agreed. With that simple understanding established, both men moved toward each other, embodying their life's work, their martial philosophy, their answer to how conflict should be approached. The clash of styles had revealed differences and similarities, strengths and adaptations. Now would come the moment of truth, not to determine a winner, but to discover what happened when both philosophies expressed themselves fully. The crowd held its collective breath, phones raised, eyes wide, witnessing not just a physical exchange, but a moment of martial arts history when two different paths converged to reveal the common truth at their destination. Master Wong leaned forward, his weathered hands resting on his knees, his eyes sharp beneath white brows. "Now," he murmured, "we will see what happens when philosophy meets reality, when theory faces pressure, when different truths collide." The exhibition hall fell silent as Chuck and Donnie closed distance, each carrying not just their own legacy, but the lineage of traditions that had shaped them. What followed would not just be a clash of styles, but a meeting of minds, a dialogue of movement that would reveal martial arts in its purest form, not as combat or competition, but as exploration, as philosophy, as path toward understanding the deepest truths of human movement and conflict. And in that moment of convergence, the artificial boundaries between styles began to dissolve, revealing the universal principles that lay beneath all effective martial expression. The exhibition hall held its breath. The fluorescent lights seemed to intensify, casting every detail of the two masters in sharp relief, the controlled rise and fall of their chests, the slight sheen of perspiration on their foreheads, the unwavering focus in their eyes. This wasn't just the climax of an unexpected demonstration. It was the culmination of 2 lifetimes dedicated to martial understanding. "This final exchange," the announcer said, his voice hushed with reverence, "represents more than technique. It represents philosophy expressed through human movement, the accumulated wisdom of decades." A profound silence settled over the crowd. The usual rustling, whispering, and shifting that accompanies any large gathering had ceased entirely. Even breathing seemed muted, as if everyone present understood that they were witnessing something rare and significant, a moment when martial arts transcended entertainment or sport to reveal its deeper essence. Chuck set himself, drawing upon everything his journey had taught him. His stance incorporated the solid foundation of his Korean training, the practical adaptability of his American innovations, and the fluidity he had developed through cross-training. At 70-plus years, he moved with the economy of someone who had long ago discarded the unnecessary, retaining only what functioned under pressure. His eyes, clear and focused beneath the iconic brow that had become familiar to millions through film, held not aggression but intensity of purpose, the look of someone prepared to express truth through action. Across from him, Donnie settled into pure Wing Chun structure, rooted but not rigid, centered but not stiff. His hands floated at the center line, embodying Ip Man's core, teaching that the shortest distance between 2 points was always a straight line. There was something timeless in his posture, connecting him to generations of practitioners who had refined this system through centuries of practical application. His expression remained calm, almost meditative. Yet those close enough could see the depth of concentration in his gaze, not tension, but complete presence. For several heartbeats, neither moved. The crowd's collective anticipation built with each passing second. Phones remained raised, but many had stopped actively recording, too caught up in the moment to worry about documentation. The air itself seemed charged with potential energy. Master Wong leaned forward in his seat, eyes narrowed with the perception of someone who had spent a lifetime studying such exchanges. "Watch carefully," he murmured to those nearby. What happens next will reveal not just skill, but understanding. Then, without signal or warning, both men exploded into motion. Chuck launched forward with a combination that represented the pinnacle of his integrated approach. A jab that transformed mid-extension into an angular strike, flowing seamlessly into a spinning technique that generated centrifugal force. His footwork created angles that threatened to bypass Wing Chun's preferred centerline control, while his hand techniques came from directions designed to test the boundaries of Donnie's sensitivity. Each movement flowed into the next without hesitation or telegraph, demonstrating not just technical proficiency, but deep understanding of how human beings move and respond under pressure. It was martial arts as mature expression, not just trained response but creative adaptation, not just technique but perspective. Donnie met the onslaught with Wing Chun in its most distilled form. Where another might have retreated from Chuck's dynamic approach, he stepped forward into it, occupying the center line, even as Chuck's techniques sought to claim it. His hands moved with extraordinary economy, each motion simultaneously defensive and offensive, protecting his structure while threatening Chuck's. There was a liquid quality to his movement, an ability to yield without collapsing, to absorb without being overcome. The contrast was dramatic yet beautiful. Chuck's approach creating space and angles, generating power through rotation and momentum. Donnie's controlling the space between them, developing force through structure and directness. Two different answers to the same eternal questions of combat and self-protection. For those in the audience with training, the technical brilliance was breathtaking. For those without martial background, the sheer intensity and control demonstrated by both men told a story anyone could appreciate, of dedication, of mastery, of principles embodied so completely they appeared effortless. The exchange accelerated, each man pushing to express his art more purely, more authentically. Chuck's combinations became more complex, leveraging every advantage of his approach, the versatility across ranges, the unpredictability of angles, the integration of hand and foot techniques into seamless sequences. Where some martial artists might become more rigid under pressure, falling back on familiar patterns, Chuck seemed to expand, accessing a broader vocabulary of movement. His experience allowed him to adapt mid-sequence, responding to Donnie's counters not with rehearsed technique, but with in-the-moment creativity guided by principle. "Look how he transitions between ranges," someone whispered in the audience. "From kicking distance to clinch without hesitation." Donnie's Wing Chun responded not by matching complexity with complexity, but by finding the simple truth within the complicated exchange. His sensitivity allowed him to track multiple threats simultaneously. His structure absorbed what couldn't be redirected, and his positioning found counters within Chuck's continuous assault. Where Chuck's approach expressed diversity, Donnie's demonstrated refinement, the ability to solve complex problems through fundamental principles rather than specialized techniques. "Notice how little he moves," Master Wong commented quietly. "Every action serves multiple purposes simultaneously." The crowd witnessed martial arts in its purest expression, not performance, not sport, but the embodiment of philosophical truths through physical movement. The exchange wasn't about winning or losing. It was about discovery through pressure, about principles tested under fire. In one particularly revealing sequence, Chuck managed to disrupt Donnie's preferred range, forcing him into a distance where Wing Chun traditionally operated at a disadvantage. Rather than retreating to reset, Donnie adapted in real time, extending Wing Chun principles beyond their usual context. His footwork adjusted, his hands modified their relationship to his center, and his structure maintained integrity even as it evolved to meet the new challenge. Chuck acknowledged the adaptation with a subtle nod, even as he pressed the advantage. This wasn't about exploiting weakness, it was about testing capacity for growth under pressure, the true measure of any martial system. The exchange continued, gathering intensity not through increased aggression, but through deeper commitment to principle. Neither man held back out of politeness or concern, yet neither pushed beyond the boundaries of control. This was pressure testing at its most authentic, honest enough to reveal truth, controlled enough to prevent injury. Spectators who had come expecting a spectacle found themselves witnessing something far more meaningful. This wasn't about flashy techniques or dramatic knockouts. It was about the conversation that happens when two lifetime practitioners meet with honesty and skill. A physical dialogue that reveals more about martial arts than any verbal discussion ever could. "They're not fighting," one young practitioner said in sudden understanding. "They're communicating." In the most intense moment, Chuck unleashed his signature combination, the sequence that had defined his competitive career, and later, his cinematic identity. It came not as choreography but as authentic expression, carrying the full weight of his martial journey. Power generated from the ground up. Techniques flowing one into another, creating a storm of controlled force directed at Donnie's position. His hands and feet moved in perfect coordination, attacking not just Donnie's physical space but the principles that defined his approach. Testing not just the man but the system he represented. For a heartbeat, it seemed Wing Chun might be overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of the assault. Donnie's hands, despite their sensitivity and efficiency, appeared momentarily insufficient against the multidirectional nature of Chuck's approach. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not disappointment but concern, the natural response when witnessing pressure that approaches breaking point. Master Wong leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Now we will see," he whispered, "if the claim holds true." What happened next became instant martial arts legend captured on hundreds of phones, destined to be analyzed in dojos and kwuns around the world for years to come. Donnie didn't abandon Wing Chun principles when tested beyond their comfort zone. Instead, he expressed them more essentially, finding the Wing Chun truth beneath the Wing Chun form. As Chuck's combination reached its apex, Donnie stepped not away from the pressure but into it, occupying the eye of the storm. His structure bent without breaking. His hands found the gaps between Chuck's techniques not through speed but through understanding of energy. And when he countered, it was with a chain of strikes so economical yet powerful that they seemed to materialize rather than travel. The centerline principle, the efficiency of motion, the sensitivity to energy, all these core aspects of Wing Chun manifested not as stylized technique, but as adaptive response. Someone in the audience gasped audibly. Others leaned forward, trying to process what they were seeing. This wasn't just skillful martial arts. This was martial philosophy made visible, theory manifested through flesh and bone, principles proven under genuine pressure. Chuck, far from being frustrated by Donnie's adaptation, seemed energized by it. His expression intensified, not with aggression but with appreciation. The look of someone who had sought truth and found it embodied before him. His next sequence came not as an attempt to overcome but as a continuation of the dialogue, pushing deeper into the question of how different approaches handled the eternal problems of combat. The exchange culminated in a moment of perfect balance, Chuck's final technique and Donnie's counter-meeting in space, neither overcoming the other, both expressing their truth completely. For a fraction of a second, they were perfectly connected, perfectly opposed, perfectly balanced, yin and yang, hard and soft, expansive and focused. Then, as if by mutual understanding, both men stopped. They stood facing each other, breathing heavily, neither having dominated the other, both having tested and been tested. The exhibition hall remained frozen in silence, witnesses to something that transcended spectacle or competition, a moment of martial honesty rarely seen outside the closed doors of training halls. Time seemed suspended. The floodlights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a door closed quietly. But no one moved, no one spoke. Everyone sensing that what they had just witnessed deserved a moment of reverent silence. Chuck was the first to lower his hands, a gesture that acknowledged the completion of their dialogue. His expression held not disappointment but profound respect, the look of someone who had sought truth and found it, even if it wasn't exactly what he had expected. "Your Wing Chun," he said, his voice carrying in the silence, "doesn't just work in theory or demonstration." Donnie inclined his head slightly, returning the respect. "And your approach proves that principles matter more than systems." The simple exchange carried layers of meaning for those who understood martial arts at a deeper level. Both men were acknowledging something fundamental, that beneath the different forms, techniques, and traditions lay universal truths about human movement, energy, and conflict. Chuck took a step forward, closing the distance between them not as a combatant but as a fellow traveler on the martial path. "When you said Ip Man style beats anything, I heard a challenge," he admitted. "But what I found was a perspective." Donnie nodded in understanding. "And when you entered unannounced, I expected confrontation. What I discovered was conversation." The crowd, sensing the profound nature of what they had witnessed, erupted into applause, not the rowdy cheering of a sporting event, but the appreciative recognition of something authentic and meaningful. People rose to their feet, not just in excitement, but in respect for what had been shared. The announcer, visibly moved, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have just witnessed something historic. Not just a demonstration of techniques, but a dialogue between philosophies, between lifetimes of dedication." Master Wong nodded slowly, satisfaction evident in his expression. "This," he said to those around him, "is what martial arts was always meant to be. Not about who is better, but about what we can learn from each other." On the demonstration floor, Chuck extended his hand. Donnie clasped it firmly. The gesture was simple but profound. A bridge between traditions, between East and West, between different answers to the same eternal questions. In that moment, everyone present understood that the climax of this unexpected encounter wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about mutual recognition, about respect earned through honest exchange, about the truth that emerges when pretense falls away and only principle remains. And in that truth lay the answer to Donnie's initial claim that Ip Man style beats anything. Not because it was inherently superior to all other approaches, but because when practiced with true understanding, it expressed martial principles that transcended style itself. The same could be said of Chuck's integrated approach, which had evolved beyond its original boundaries to express those same universal principles through different movement patterns. The two men stood together at center stage, no longer separated by space or philosophy, but united by something deeper, the recognition that beneath all the differences in form lay a common understanding of martial truth. As they stood there, a subtle change seemed to come over the exhibition hall. What had begun as an event, a demonstration, a spectacle, an attraction had transformed into something approaching ceremony. The lights seemed warmer, the air clearer, the moment sanctified by the authenticity of what had transpired. People would remember different details later, the precise sequence of Chuck's combination, the exact nature of Donnie's counter, the words exchanged afterward. But everyone would remember the feeling, that rare sensation of witnessing something genuine in a world often defined by performance, of seeing truth expressed through human movement, of understanding that beneath all the different forms, techniques, and traditions of martial arts lay universal principles waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beyond style to essence. And in that shared understanding, a new chapter in martial arts history had been written, not through competition or conquest, but through dialogue and mutual respect. As Chuck and Donnie stood together at the center of the demonstration floor, hands clasped in mutual respect, the exhibition hall vibrated with energy. The applause continued, punctuated by shouts of appreciation and the constant clicking of camera shutters. This wasn't just the conclusion of an unexpected demonstration, it was a moment that would be remembered in martial arts circles for generations. The overhead lights caught the sheen of perspiration on both men's foreheads, highlighting the physical effort behind what had appeared so effortless. Despite their age difference, both showed the controlled breathing of lifelong practitioners, deep, measured inhalations that settled their energy after the intense exchange. Their eyes held a mutual recognition that transcended words, the kind of understanding that can only come from having walked similar paths, albeit in different ways. Around them, the crowd's energy transformed from the tense anticipation of witnessing conflict to the warm appreciation of having experienced something authentic. Martial artists of various disciplines exchanged glances of confirmation, silent acknowledgments that they had just seen something rare in the modern world. Martial arts expressed not as entertainment or sport, but as living philosophy. The announcer, recognizing the historic significance of what had transpired, approached with reverent steps. His usual polished professional demeanor had softened, replaced by genuine awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the now hushed hall, "I believe we have just witnessed something that transcends exhibition or competition. Would either of our distinguished masters care to share their thoughts?" Chuck looked to Donnie, deferring to him as the original presenter. It was a small gesture but significant. An acknowledgement that this was Donnie's stage first, that Chuck had entered as the visitor. Donnie nodded slightly in appreciation of the courtesy, then turned to address the crowd. His voice was measured, as controlled as his movements had been throughout the exchange. "What we shared today was not about proving which approach is superior," he began, the microphone carrying his words to every corner of the hall. "It was about testing truth through pressure, about discovering what remains when theory meets reality." He paused, allowing his words to settle. The crowd remained silent, absorbing not just what he said but the humility with which he said it. Here was a man who had just demonstrated extraordinary skill, yet spoke without a trace of self-aggrandizement. "In Wing Chun, we are taught that the form is just the beginning," Donnie continued. "The real understanding comes when principle is tested under pressure, when the ideal meets the unpredictable." He gestured toward Chuck, with obvious respect. Sifu Norris embodies a lifetime of martial exploration, not limited by tradition but guided by it. His approach demonstrates that principles matter more than forms. The crowd murmured in appreciation, many nodding in agreement. These weren't just pleasantries. They were insights earned through decades of dedicated practice, now confirmed through their exchange. Chuck stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without effort. Age had done nothing to diminish the quiet authority that had made him a legend. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience, of lessons learned not just through victory but through the humility that comes from true mastery. "And Donnie Yen's Wing Chun reveals why this system has endured for centuries," he added, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "Not because it's flashy or complicated, but because it's built on understanding human movement at its most fundamental level." He turned slightly toward Donnie. "When I heard you say, 'Ip Man style beats anything,' I came to test that claim. What I found wasn't superiority or inferiority, but truth expressed differently, efficiency meeting adaptability, tradition meeting innovation." The crowd listened in rapt attention, many recording these words with the same intensity they had captured the physical exchange. This wasn't just commentary, it was wisdom, earned through lifetimes of dedication. From the front row, Master Wong rose from his seat, his movements deliberate but fluid, despite his age. He made his way slowly toward the demonstration floor, leaning slightly on a wooden cane that seemed more ceremonial than necessary. The crowd parted naturally for him, recognizing from his bearing that he too was a keeper of martial tradition. When he reached the center, Both Chuck and Donnie bowed slightly in acknowledgement of his experience. "I have studied many systems over many decades," Master Wong said, his voice carrying surprisingly well despite his age. "And what I witnessed today confirms what I have long believed, that beneath all the different forms, techniques, and traditions lie universal truths about human movement and energy." He turned slowly, addressing not just Chuck and Donnie but the entire audience. "When I was young, I believed that some styles were inherently superior to others. I trained with that competitive mindset, always looking to prove my approach was better." A slight smile crossed his weathered features. "Age brings perspective. Experience brings humility." He looked between Chuck and Donnie, his gaze sharp despite his years. "One expresses these truths through diversity of technique, through adaptation across ranges. The other expresses them through economy of motion, through control of space. Different languages speaking the same truth." The crowd murmured in appreciation of his insight. Even those without martial arts background could grasp the profound nature of what he was articulating. "So when Donnie Yen says Ip Man's style beats anything," Master Wong continued, "and when Chuck Norris comes to test this claim, they are not enemies or rivals. They are explorers meeting at the same destination by different paths." Donnie nodded in agreement. The statement was not about superiority, but about essence. Wing Chun, when practiced with true understanding, expresses martial principles that transcend style itself. The same could be said of any approach that has been refined through honest practice, Chuck added, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had tested his beliefs through decades of application. "What matters isn't the system but the principles it embodies and the person embodying them." A young martial artist near the front called out a question, his voice tentative but clear. "But in a real fight, which would prevail?" The question hung in the air, representing the very mindset that both masters had just transcended. Rather than dismissing it, Chuck and Donnie exchanged a glance of understanding, recognizing that they too had once framed martial arts in such terms. "In a real fight, as you call it," Chuck responded, "what prevails isn't the style but the practitioner's understanding of fundamental principles, distance, timing, structure, awareness." He gestured toward Donnie. Two masters with deep understanding would likely reach a similar conclusion, regardless of their style's outward appearance. Donnie nodded. The question itself reflects a misunderstanding of what martial arts becomes at its highest level. It's not about style versus style, but about how deeply one has internalized universal principles. The three masters stood together, representing different generations, different traditions, but a shared understanding of martial truth. The image captured on countless phones and professional cameras would become iconic in martial arts communities worldwide. The announcer, sensing the perfect moment to conclude the formal portion, stepped forward again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have witnessed not just an exhibition but a lesson, a reminder that martial arts at its highest level is not about division but connection, not about domination but understanding." As the formal proceedings concluded, the exhibition hall transformed. Security created space for Chuck and Donnie to move without being overwhelmed. But many attendees lingered, discussing what they had witnessed with animated gestures and reverent tones. The energy had shifted from spectacle to contemplation, from entertainment to education. In one corner, a group of Wing Chun practitioners debated the subtle adaptations they had observed in Donnie's application, how he had maintained the system's core principles while adjusting to Chuck's unpredictable approaches. In another area, Western martial artists analyzed Chuck's integrated style, noting how he had drawn from multiple traditions to create something both personal and universal. Near the edge of the demonstration floor, a young practitioner approached Master Wong hesitantly. The young man wore the branded T-shirt of a popular MMA gym, his muscular build suggesting dedicated training. but his expression betrayed uncertainty. "Master," he said, his voice betraying his nervousness, "I train in MMA. After seeing this, I don't know which approach to follow. Which is better for someone starting their journey?" Master Wong studied him for a moment, seeing not just the question, but the genuine search for guidance behind it. He smiled gently. "You ask the wrong question, young man. The approach matters less than the principles it teaches you. Some find their truth through Wing Chun's economy. Others, through the integration of diverse techniques. The path is less important than walking it with awareness." The young man nodded slowly, processing this perspective. "So it's not about which style wins. It's about which style speaks to you," Master Wong finished. "And whether you have the discipline to listen deeply enough to hear what it's truly saying." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Your MMA training isn't separate from what you witnessed today. At its best, it too seeks to discover universal principles through pressure testing. The difference is context, not essence." The young fighter's expression brightened with understanding. "I never thought of it that way." "Few do," Master Wong acknowledged. "That's why moments like today are precious. They remind us to look beyond the surface." Across the hall, Donnie and Chuck had moved to a quieter area, away from the main crowd. They sat together. No longer masters performing for an audience, but simply two men who shared a lifetime of similar experiences despite their different paths. An assistant brought them tea, served in simple ceramic cups. The gesture seemed fitting, a return to tradition after the intensity of their exchange. They sipped in companionable silence for a moment, neither feeling the need to fill the space with words. "Your Wing Chun has evolved from tradition," Chuck observed finally, setting his cup down. "You've made it your own." Donnie nodded. "As you've done with your approach. Neither of us is bound by form alone. That's the secret few understand," Chuck said, leaning forward slightly. "The form is just the beginning. The real journey starts when you discover the principles beneath the movements. And when those principles are tested under pressure," Donnie added, "like today." Chuck smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stoic features. "When you said, 'Ip Man style beats anything,' I had to come see for myself. Not because I doubted you, but because claims like that should be explored, not just stated." "And now?" Donnie asked. "Now, I understand what you meant," Chuck replied. "It wasn't about Wing Chun being unbeatable in competition or combat. It was about the philosophy being complete when understood deeply." "The same could be said of your approach," Donnie acknowledged. "Different expression. Same essence." They fell silent again. The kind of comfortable silence that exists between those who have communicated deeply without words. Around them, the exhibition continued. Other demonstrations took place, other martial artists shared their knowledge, but the energy had shifted. Everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment when martial arts transcended performance or competition to express its deepest truths. In a quiet corner, a journalist was interviewing Master Wong. Her recorder held respectfully as she leaned in to catch his words. "What we saw today," Master Wong was saying, "connects to the original purpose of martial arts. Before it became sport or entertainment, it was about discovering truth through movement, about understanding human potential through disciplined practice." "And what truth did we see today?" the journalist asked. Master Wong smiled. "That the highest level of martial arts isn't about defeating others. It's about transcending the limitations of your own understanding." Both Donnie and Chuck showed us that mastery isn't about having all the answers, but about remaining open to deeper questions. As the day drew to a close, Donnie and Chuck stood together near the exit, preparing to leave. A group of young martial artists approached cautiously, clearly torn between respect for the master's privacy and desire to express their appreciation. Chuck noticed them first and nodded in acknowledgement. One young woman, gathering her courage, stepped forward as spokesperson for the group. "We just wanted to thank you both," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Most of us train in different styles, and there's often so much argument about which approach is better. Today showed us something different, that at the highest level, those arguments miss the point entirely." Donnie smiled gently. "The styles are just vehicles. The destination is understanding of movement, of energy, of yourself. And that understanding doesn't come from claiming superiority," Chuck added, "but from constant exploration, from testing your beliefs honestly." The young woman nodded, clearly moved by their words. Will you both be collaborating again? Perhaps teaching together?" Chuck and Donnie exchanged a glance. A moment of silent communication between two men who had found unexpected common ground. "Today wasn't planned," Donnie said. "It was organic, authentic. But sometimes," Chuck added with a slight smile, "the most meaningful encounters are the ones you don't schedule." The answer wasn't direct, but it contained possibility, the potential for future dialogue, not just between these two masters but between the traditions they represented. As they finally departed, walking side by side toward the exit, cameras continued to follow them, capturing this final image of unity. Two legends from different worlds, different traditions, who had come together not in competition but in exploration. Behind them, Master Wong watched their departure with satisfaction. A younger instructor beside him asked, "So who won, in your assessment?" Master Wong chuckled softly. "When knowledge is shared honestly, everyone wins. When ego is set aside for truth, no one loses." He gestured toward the departing figures of Chuck and Donnie. "Today, martial arts won. Understanding won. Respect won." Outside the exhibition hall, as evening settled over Hong Kong, social media was already exploding with footage and commentary. Clips of the exchange spread virally, accompanied by hashtags like Legends Meet and Beyond Style. Martial arts forums filled with technical analysis, with practitioners of different systems finding new appreciation for approaches they had previously dismissed. Some commentators tried to frame the event in competitive terms, declaring one man or the other the winner, based on particular moments in the exchange. But those who had been present knew better. They had witnessed something that transcended the binary of victory and defeat, something that spoke to the deeper purpose of martial arts as a vehicle for human development. In a small restaurant nearby, Donnie and Chuck shared a quiet dinner, away from cameras and crowds. Their conversation flowed naturally between technical discussions of their exchange and broader reflections on their martial journeys. Despite having traveled different paths, they found common ground in the challenges they had faced, the insights they had gained, and the evolution of their understanding over decades of practice. In the end, Chuck observed as they concluded their meal, "What we're both trying to express isn't just about fighting. It's about how human beings can move through the world with awareness, with efficiency, with respect for natural principles." Donnie nodded. "The physical is just the beginning. The techniques open the door to something deeper." As they parted ways outside the restaurant, their handshake transformed naturally into the traditional martial artist's salute, fist pressed against open palm, a gesture of respect that transcended cultural boundaries. But beyond the digital buzz and analysis, something more profound had occurred. Two men who had devoted their lives to understanding conflict, movement, and human potential had met not as competitors but as explorers, and in doing so, had demonstrated that beneath all the different forms, techniques, and traditions of martial arts lay universal truths waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beyond style to essence. And in that demonstration lay the real victory, not of one approach over another, but of understanding over division, of respect over rivalry, of shared wisdom over isolated knowledge. As Chuck Norris and Donnie Yen walked away from the exhibition hall, they carried with them not trophies or titles, but something far more valuable: the satisfaction of having engaged in martial arts at its most authentic level, as a vehicle for discovering truth, for expressing philosophy through movement, and for building bridges between traditions that only seemed different until you looked deeply enough to see their common core. Their unexpected encounter had begun with a bold claim, "Ip Man's style beats anything," but had concluded with a deeper understanding that true mastery transcends style itself, finding expression through different forms, but always rooted in the same fundamental principles of human movement and energy. And in that understanding, both legends had found not victory over each other, but victory with each other, the shared triumph of martial artists who had devoted their lives to the same essential quest, just by different paths. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.